Hilda, Chapter 4 Safety. May 11, my birthday. The day I should have felt special, but instead I was trapped in the same routine. I sat behind the counter of the shop, staring at the empty aisles. Not a single customer had walked in. The store felt more like a tomb than a place of business, quiet and still, with only the faint hum of the ceiling fan filling the space. I wished Carl and Dad could have come back home, just for today. My birthday used to mean something when we were together, Carl teasing me about getting older, Dad pretending to forget, only to pull out some small gift he'd hidden away. But now, those moments felt like dreams, too far gone to hold on to. The reality was that I was alone, sitting in a shop that no one visited, waiting for the time to pass. The shelves seemed to sag under the weight of the dust gathering on them, the sunlight filtering through the windows in soft beams that only illuminated the emptiness. I looked down at my hands, rougher now than they'd been a year ago. Fingers tired from working, I had grown in more ways than one, though none of it felt like a celebration. My mind drifted, wondering if Carl even remembered it was my birthday. Did Dad? Probably not. They were out there somewhere fighting a war I didn't understand, for a cause I couldn't stand behind. I sighed, glancing at the clock. The minutes dragged on, each tick louder than the last, reminding me that no one was coming, not today, not for my birthday. That day didn't come like any normal birthday. It came with a sound so loud it felt like the sky had split open. A thunderous roar ripped through the air, vibrating through my bones. I froze behind the counter, the wooden surface trembling beneath my fingers. The ground shook beneath my feet, and I swear I could feel the weary earth groaning beneath the weight of the blast. Was it our turn? I guess it was. For months we had heard stories of towns reduced to rubble, of bombs tearing through homes like paper, of lives ending in an instant, but those stories had always belonged to someone else, another city, another family. Now it was us, our town, our people. The shop windows rattled violently, and for a moment I thought they might shatter. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear anything else, and the air felt thick with tension, like the entire world was holding its breath. My mom burst through the door, her face pale with fear. "What's going on?" she shouted, her voice barely cutting through the ringing in my ears. I could hear the sirens, those dreaded wailing alarms that we'd only ever practiced for, but this was no drill. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We were taught for this in school, the steps drilled into our heads again and again. We had to go to the shelter, but I couldn't move. "Shelter," I finally managed to shout back, my voice cracking with panic. My body jerked into motion, but I wasn't thinking straight. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. Mom grabbed my arm, dragging me out of the shop. "Come on," she urged. We stumbled through the streets, joining the panicked crowd heading toward the shelters, the sirens screaming louder with every second. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the sky falling behind us. The streets were chaos as we made our way toward the shelter, a cacophony of shouts, cries, and the piercing wails of sirens filling the air. The once familiar road felt alien, transformed by fear and urgency. People surged past us, faces etched with panic and uncertainty, clutching children, dragging belongings, and darting glances at the sky as if it might crack open at any moment. As we approached the shelter, I could see the heavy steel door looming ahead, a fortress of safety amid the madness. A group of people pressed against it, anxiously awaiting their turn to enter. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear, mingling with the metallic tang of the nearby street lamps flickering erratically. From somewhere nearby, a radio blurred, it started crackling before cutting through the noise with urgent announcements. "Attention citizens, an air raid is in progress. Seek shelter immediately. Remain calm and stay in your designated areas. This is not a drill." The voice was frantic, barely holding it together as the ominous background of the sirens grew louder, drowning out the end of the announcement. "Faster, Hilda!" Mom shouted, pulling me forward as we weaved through the crowd. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, matching the tempo of the chaos around us. The panic was palpable. It was like a living entity, twisting through the throng of people, infecting everyone with its desperation. Finally, we reached the shelter's entrance. The door cracked open, and I was met with a gust of stale air, filled with the tension of those who had already sought refuge. As we stepped inside, the noise began to dim, replaced by the low murmur of anxious conversations and the occasional sob. We squeezed into the cramped space, surrounded by the dim glow of flickering light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. We stayed huddled in that cramped, suffocating space for what like hours. Time lost meaning as the walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the heat of too many bodies pressed together. The only sound besides the occasional sob or whispered prayer was the distant terrifying hum of the planes overhead. Even now, thinking back, I can still hear it. That low menace drone, it was more than just a sound. It was a promise of destruction, creeping closer like the shadows of death itself stretching across the city. Every few minutes, the rumble would get louder, the earth beneath us trembling as the bombs fell somewhere in the distance. You could feel it in your bones, the deep, violent thud reverberating through the ground, shaking the shelter's walls, vibrating the benches we sat on. Each explosion was like a pulse, a reminder that our lives hung in the balance. People around us sat in silence, frozen with terror, eyes wide as they stared at the floor, their hands trembling in their laps. Some children whimpered, their cries muffled by parents who rocked them back and forth as if the motion could protect them from what was happening above. I wanted to cover my ears to block it all out, the sirens, the planes, the distance, but all too real blast. But there was no escaping it. The sound would seep in through the cracks in the door, through the very walls, lodging itself deep inside you. I can still hear it, even now, that hum, that never-ending drone. It's a sound that stays with you, buried deep in your memory, surfacing in the quiet moments when everything is still. It's not just a memory of fear, it's a memory of helplessness, of being trapped beneath the weight of something far beyond your control, waiting for it to end, praying it will miss you this time. After some minutes, through the muffled cries and the oppressive silence, I heard the faint crackle of the radio, a voice breaking through the static, urgent, and grim. The radio operator's voice was calm, too calm for what was happening outside. It was as if he was trying to shield us from the chaos, like a parent soothing a frightened child, but there was no hiding the fear beneath these words. "Attention, citizens," the voice echoed, barely audible over the distant thunder of bombs. "The enemy is targeting our city. We urge you to remain in the shelters and stay calm. The Luftwaffe is responding to the attacks. Stay indoors. Do not attempt to leave until it's safe to do so." I could hear the forced control in his tone, the underlying strain as he delivered the official message. There was a pause, a brief moment of static, and then he continued with the dreaded update. "Several areas have been hit. Bombs have fallen near the central train station and the northern industrial district. Damage is extensive." As soon as the radio mentioned the train station, my stomach dropped. Bauer's house was near there. The thought of bombs falling that close to where she lived, it hit me harder than I could have imagined. I could barely breathe, a knot tightening in my chest. I squeezed my hands together, nails digging into my palms, trying to focus on anything but the horrible images in my mind. The streets around the station were always busy, full of people going about their day. What if Bauer hadn't made it to a shelter? What if she was out there, caught in the middle of the destruction? The steady hum of the radio above have continued, but all I could think about was her. The radio cracked to life again after what felt like an eternity. I was shaking, my breath shallow, but I clung to every word as the announcer spoke. "The air raid has ended. We have confirmation that the bombing has ceased for now. Citizens may return home. Rescue efforts are underway near the central train station. Further instruction will be provided. Remain cautious." Safety. That word echoed in my mind, but I couldn't feel it. The tightness in my chest hadn't gone away. I felt no relief. The moment the announcement had ended, I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. "Hilda, where are you going?" my mother asked, her voice full of concern and fear. I couldn't stay here another second. I had to see her. I had to know she was all right. I could hear her calling after me, but the words didn't register. The only thing I could think about was Bauer, whether she had made it through the bombing. My feet hit the pavement hard as I ran, faster than I'd ever run before, weaving through the streets that were still filled with the dust and the remnants of the chaos. The ground was littered with debris, the air still stuck with smoke and the metallic scent of destruction. Each step felt heavier than the last. My heart pounded, a mix of exhaustion and fear surging through me. I could hear my breath coming out ragged, sharp in my eyes, but I couldn't stop. I kept thinking about her house, so close to the station, too close to the bus. My mind flashed with terrible images, scenes I did not want to imagine but couldn't shake. What if she hadn't made it to safety in time? What if she was trapped under the rubble, her house reduced to ash? The streets were eerily quiet now, save for the distant cries of those still reeling from the devastation. The city, which once seemed so permanent, felt fragile, crumbling like paper around me. The only sound that mattered was the pounding of my shoes against the ground, and the beating of my heart in sync with it, louder and louder. I passed by broken windows, toppled lampposts, and people standing silently outside their homes, their faces pale and wide-eyed, processing this aftermath. I didn't stop to ask anyone. I couldn't. Then I reached the edge of the street that led to Bauer's house. My stomach dropped. From where I stood, I could see the station, or what was left of it. The destruction was immense. Smoke billowed from the wreckage, and parts of the nearby buildings had crumbled. I looked from a distance for what like an eternity, my heart racing as I weighed the risk of stepping into the street. The chaos around me pulsed like a heartbeat, each sound amplifying my fear. I felt paralyzed, caught between the dread of approaching and the desperate need to reach her. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A familiar voice broke through a fog of panic. "Hilda!" I turned sharply, my heart leaping as I saw her standing there. Bauer! Relief flowed over me, so overwhelming that I almost stumbled forward. She looked disheveled, a head tousled and her face smudged with dust, but she was alive. "Hilda, what are you doing here?" Her voice was urgent, laced with concern as she rushed toward me. I could see the fear in her eyes mirroring my own, and for a moment the world around us faded away. It was just the two of us standing in the midst of the chaos. "I was so scared," I admitted, my voice trembling as I fought back tears. "I heard the explosions and I thought—" Before I could finish, she closed the distance between us, wrapping her arms around me in a fierce embrace. I melted into her warmth, feeling the tremor of her body against mine, and all the fear I had bottled up spilled out in a wave of emotion. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice steadying me. As she held me, the noise of the outside world faded slightly, and for a brief moment I felt as if we could cocoon ourselves against the horrors unfolding around us. Again, I found myself crying in her arms. My legs gave out beneath me and I collapsed into her arms, gripping onto her as if she were the only thing anchoring me to the earth. The tears blurred my vision until I couldn't see anything but her, feel anything but her warm, protective hold. The sound of my own cries seemed to echo in the empty street, but it was her voice, soft and soothing, that cut through the noise. I clung to her tighter, burying my face in her shoulder as if hiding from the world. Every time she whispered "it's okay," a little more of the weight on my chest lifted. I had no words, just the release of all the emotion I had bottled up for weeks. The fear, the anger, and the helplessness, and the grief. I could feel her hand move slowly up and down my back, each touch steady and patient, grounding me even as the world outside felt like it was unraveling. I pulled back just enough to look up at her, my tears still falling but my breathing beginning to slow. Her eyes, kind and full of unspoken understanding, met mine. I could see the worry etched in her face, but behind it there was something else, love. not the kind that came with grand declarations, but the kind that was steady, unwavering, and real.